Dewan is teaching today, and I wanted to, for once, introduce her properly. And I got it all backwards the last time. She served in pastoral ministry for 35 years in the Florida and the Georgia Cumberland Conference. And she was with the North American Division Ministerial. She was Associate Director of Ministerial, North American Division Associate Ministerial Director for 10 years. Currently, she provides pastoral counseling and spiritual care for conference employees. I'm sure she stays quite busy. She has 2 adult children and 1 grandchild. She loves good books, gardening, and the arts. So I think Roy is going to have an announcement before you begin. You'll introduce Roy. So with that said, why don't we have a prayer and we'll get started. Father, we're coming to you this morning, hoping that you'll open our minds up, just as you did for your 11 and your other disciples you have while you're on earth. Nothing really changed with these folks until you open their minds. We hope that happens this morning. Be with all the folks that are shut in, for the folks that are unable or incapable of being here. We appreciate and love what you do for us. We ask these things in your son's name. Amen.
Amen. I told Roy to wait till the end when more people are here so we can get some more coverage if that's okay. Yeah. So I'm so glad to have the privilege of teaching this lesson. And I think that I ended up teaching this because I opened my mouth to Doug 2 weeks ago. And we're stuck in lesson 89. And this is the 3rd week. And we are going to add a couple of more lessons, but this is the 3rd week that we've been in lesson 89. The first week, Doug presented the class, and he talked about the cunningness of Jesus and how he's both the lion and the lamb. And then Ken last week took this story from the perspective of the Father. And he led one of the most profound and therapeutic, Ken.
Sorry.
I said you led the most profound and therapeutic Sabbath school lesson last week on doubt, because so often as Christians, we don't talk about our doubts and our struggles on this profound, deep level that we have. Today, I want to look at this story from the perspective of the disciples. It's curious to me, every time that we have done one of these lessons, we've always moved on the next week. This is the 3rd week in this one lesson. And the question I was asking myself this week, why have we spent 3 weeks on this lesson? And I have some hunches about that, that it is the most pivotal story beginning the last 6 months of Jesus' life here on earth. And so for us to spend a little bit more time here is just so valuable. Since his class is about life transformation, that we want to know something more about Jesus, something more about our own experience, and we want to make application of these theological, biblical truths to our own lives. I want to begin with the question that Doug posed in the outline that he sent in our class. And that was, what throws us off balance? What throws you off balance? What makes you lose hope or disorient you and makes you feel like you're off your game? And I'll start with a little story while you think about your own life experience. When I taught the lesson last time, someone said to me, "Luan, you just didn't seem like you were on your game."
Thanks.
And I appreciate the feedback. And I'm thinking about that myself. Why was I off my game that week? I was off the game because someone significant in my life had hurt me deeply. And it was disorienting me. I'm trying to sort it out. What is going on here that this person who I love and I feel like they love me, that they would have done this thing. And it was disorienting to me. And you know, I know coming into that class Saturday morning, I was struggling with that dynamic. So what gets you off your game? Think about that. What gets you off your game? What causes you to lose hope?
I think maybe when we become tired.
Yes.
And it's easier.
Okay, yes, when we become tired, what else?
I think you nailed it. When we're hurt and we have great grief and loss, and you lose your confidence that everything's going to be okay. And you doubt who you are and your self-worth.
Yes, when you're personally attacked.
Thrown in survival mode.
Yes.
And they can call victim mode too.
Okay. Yes, yes. So what else? Yes.
Well, in my situation, sometimes I assumed somebody meant something personally when they are probably thinking about something else and have a lot going on, and it wasn't actually intended, directed as negatively towards me, and they're on their way thinking about their other things, and I'm over here stewing about it.
Yes, that's so
but that's my personal.
Yes, that's so often happens.
Yeah. I think sometimes we're looking for somebody to do something wrong. We have a suspicious nature, and we can totally misconstrue what they're trying to say when we come to them with that attitude. But that will throw us off our game because we're expecting to be thrown off.
Yes.
Don't expect to be thrown off.
Yes, violated expectations, isn't it? You know, you have expectations about a scenario when it falls through. Okay, so one other comment or so? Okay, so I've asked Becky if she would read our story again today so that we can refresh our minds about the details. It's number 89 in your book. As we begin to think about the disciples and what has them off their game. So go ahead, Becky.
They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, "Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The Son of Man is..."
You have the wrong story.
88.
Oh,
Not 89.
Okay, I'm sorry. It's 88.
Page 88.
No, number 8.
Matthew 17, 14 through 20. The healing of divine. Okay. I'm sorry. That's okay. It's my problem.
You're really throwing me off here.
I sure have. I sure have.
When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. "What are you arguing with them about?" he asked. A man in the crowd approached Jesus and knelt before him. "Lord, have mercy on my son, my only child, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. The spirit seizes him and he suddenly screams. It throws him into convulsions to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. It scarcely ever leaves him and is destroying him. He often falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but your disciples could not drive him out. So they brought him when the spirit saw Jesus while the boy was coming. The demon immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," said Jesus, "everything is possible for him who believes." Immediately, the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the evil spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed from that moment. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up, and he gave him back to his father. And they were all amazed at the greatness of God. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" This kind can come out only by prayer.
Thank you. Thank you. So I want to remind you of the context that the disciples have been on their first missionary journey. They have been casting out demons on this whole missionary journey. They can't do it now. What has them off their game? What has them disoriented? Why are they confused? In the last 6 months, this is at the end of the 6 months since the missionary journey began or ended. What has them off their game? Think back over the lessons that we've had. I'll write them on the board.
Well, for one thing, they had been a little disappointed that they hadn't been invited up to the mount, that it was Peter, James, and John.
Okay, not invited up mountain. What else?
Perhaps a little bit was pride that they thought that they were doing it, not God doing it through them.
Okay. Yes.
Jealousy.
Well, and Jesus' reply was, "This kind can only come out by prayer," would mean that maybe they weren't praying as much as they should have.
Yeah, not praying, that they may have become self-dependent.
Right.
Hey, what other life experiences have they gone through in the last 6 months that are affecting?
Well, they had seen, the last time they had seen 4,000 fed. I think they're still in the Gentile country.
Okay.
Or I think they still are. I think they're not listening.
Okay, not listening.
Didn't I go out in pairs?
Yes.
So one of them was paired to Judas. Would that be correct?
Yes.
He kind of got a raw deal.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he did.
I often wonder if Judas was a sandbagger the whole way through, or because of some inherent weakness of character, Satan was able to get into that one at a key moment.
Yes, yes, that he may be affecting the whole group. Yes, Gordon.
Maybe Jesus expects them to be praying every time they do that. They've gotten so self-confident they don't bother with this guy.
So they're not fulfilling expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gwen, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Go ahead.
It seemed to me as I was listening, reading the story, that they were so concentrating on themselves. They were selfish instead of selfless. So instead of concentrating in the boy, they were thinking, everyone is going to see what I'm able to do. So it was more about their show than the power of God.
Okay, thank you for that. What happened to them at the end of feeding the 5,000? Yeah, Ken? Or John?
I did, but you did first.
No, but-
All right, okay. The disciples, either they themselves or Jesus told them to. There was a disagreement. Went to the boat and started going across the sea. So they were irritated. They were irritated as the crowd were. They were irritated at Jesus, I think.
Absolutely. You know, and another thing about that incident, Jesus' popularity had shifted. You know, the 120 had left them. And what did the fact that Jesus' popularity had shifted, how was that affecting the disciples? What's your hunch?
Did they expect more out of Jesus than what maybe than what they were getting? As being the king or
yes. So
they expected something different.
Right, other than what they were getting.
Yes, they were expecting him to allow them to crown this king. If he's really the Messiah, he's going to be the king. You know, so you know they have lots of questions now about who Jesus is. In fact, Jesus even asked them, you know, who do you think I am? You know, so there's lots of questions that have been. So one of the things might have been contributing to the other things that might have been contributing to the confusion.
It could be that they had tried to drive the demon out while Jesus was there and the crowds were around. I mean, it's not clear to me. There's an implication. It says they tried, obviously.
Right.
So if they tried in the presence of Jesus, you know, even if it was remote, like on the other side of the crowd, that could have had a profound effect. I don't understand how, but
Jesus wasn't there when they were trying to trust him.
Yes, that's correct. Jesus wasn't there when they tried to do it. So
okay.
So
I'm correct.
Okay, so a couple other things, because I want to move on from this. But think about the criticism of the religious leaders that, you know, they're associated with Jesus. Their identity is with him. And for their leader to be criticized, what is that? What's the implications of that for them? And I think the most important thing, Jesus has just told them he's going to die. If your best friend told you that they were going to die, what would be happening to you?
Unacceptance.
Yes. It would be setting you off balance, wouldn't it? So this whole conglomeration of things has happened in a concentrated 6-month period. They're reeling one incident to the next. It's upsetting their equilibrium. Andrew Delbanco, who is a professor of humanities, or was a professor of humanities at Harvard University, wrote a book while he was there entitled The Real American Dream, A Meditation on Hope. It's a book that I would highly recommend to anyone. it shows how Americans have organized their days and ordered their lives, ultimately creating a culture to make sense of pain, desire, pleasure, and fear that are the stuff of the human experience. And he says this: the heart of any culture is hope. Hope is the way we overcome the lurking suspicions that all our getting and spending amounts to fidgeting while we wait for death. We must imagine some end to life that transcends our tiny allotment of days to keep at bay the back of the mind suspicion that we may be adrift in an absurd world. You understand that? The hope of any the part of any culture is hope. Cultures tend to do this collectively. They define what makes life meaningful. Delbanco goes on to say that the culture in America has changed with the different centuries. So the 18th century, what defined meaning was your service to God and your commitment to God. In the 19th century, it was about the uniting of our nation. And in this century, the 20th century, it's the actualization of self. So what was the collective hope of the Jewish culture at this time? What was their collective hope?
The Messiah.
What now?
The coming of the Messiah.
The coming of the Messiah. And how was he going to come? What was he going to do?
Going to conquer the Romans.
He's going to conquer the Romans.
Deliver them.
He's going to deliver them. He's going to set up a new kingdom. So that's what was giving them meaning and purpose. What is there anything else that was part of the culture?
That they were God's favorites and he didn't like anyone else.
Yes. And so, yes, that's very important. Anything else? What other things are part of the culture?
The rules.
The rules. What was the meaning of obeying the rules?
Guaranteed your salvation.
Okay, guaranteed salvation.
Winning favor with God.
Yes, earning favor with God. You know, one of the things that they often said was, if we could just keep the rules for one day, the Messiah would come and we would be delivered.
Have you ever thought that?
Good question, Ed. How many of you have thought that at some time in your own personal life? If I could just obey all of these rules, then life is going to be okay. Yes, yes. So people need something bigger than themselves to live for, and the disciples had found that bigger cause. And even though they were a ragtag bunch of people, they were chosen. Those 12 were chosen people. And their hopes, not only of the culture, but now that they're connected with the Messiah, are resting in their hearts. Is that not true? They're so much into that. But all these things, probably plus others, have brought them to a crisis of hope. What is the crisis going on in their hearts? What is the crisis that's going on here?
I mean, what I see in this situation is it's kind of like they have a misperception about what Jesus' kingdom is really all about. Because Jesus' kingdom wasn't to be of this world, but the next. And so with everything that's going on, it's kind of like it's shoved them into a bit of an identity crisis in a way.
Absolutely. They have believed a lie. And their lie, unbeknownst to them, they have bought into the Jewish vision of what the Messiah is, but their vision is distorted. They believe a lie. What happens when you have believed a lie and suddenly you realize you were deceived? Yes, Ruth.
Well, for the disciples, the hope that they had was not playing out. The scenario was not playing out the way they expected.
Yes.
So whenever our expectations are not playing out, you know, we feel very doomed. We feel very discouraged, depressed.
Yes.
Off balance.
Off balance, in despair, yes.
Well, I think at one time they thought Jesus was going to be king. They probably pictured their fancy houses next to him and all this stuff. And now Jesus is going to die. And you know what followers of a ruler that dies happens to them. They probably expected, we're going to die too. And if they didn't get the view that it's a heavenly kingdom really quick, they thought, well, what could happen to us? they were worried about that too, probably.
Yes, yes. Right.
What I was going to say is that when we're dealing with hope and you have the experience of hope being in front of you and it is dashed, you try very hard to have hope become even more important, not less important, because it's at risk. And so to me, they are losing their hope, and that is causing them to be irritated because their hope, as you said, believing a lie, that ends up causing them to want themselves to be even greater.
Yeah.
When you pull back and you look at the poor man in the story who brought his son, he was hoping that something good would happen. But now all of a sudden, the church leaders are fighting among themselves. So he's losing hope. What faith he had, now there is a crisis of faith.
Yes.
The disciples are probably having confusion and a crisis of faith.
Yes.
To me, I just think it's really a horrible scene.
Yes.
When the church members are fighting and this poor guy's over here saying, I just came to help my son. I didn't want to get involved in all this.
Oh, yes. And a crisis of faith is always a crisis of hope. They can't be separated. They're together. Henry Gibson, who was the Norwegian playwright, says this: when you take away anyone's lies, they lose all their happiness. I would say they lose all their hope. When you take away their lies, what lies have you believed and later came, which undermined your faith or your hope, and you later came to believe something different? What lies have you believed?
I think, I'm not going to say specifics, but I think that there are a lot of things that we learn in childhood that are maybe either misperceived by us or just feedback or, you know, outside information coming in that, you know, either we just don't understand it correctly or perceive it differently. Information about who we are that can sometimes be very distorting, and you know, it's just not who God believes we are and who we're created to be sometimes.
Yes. Any other thoughts on that?
This is 3.
Oh, is it? Okay.
So it seems to me that when a lie is taken away from you, as in many cases have been happening to various people, during our political crises in the last decade or so. It leaves you with what? But I've had a lot of lies taken away from me. They were replaced by truths that I didn't know about. And that made a big difference. In fact, it gave me more.
Yes, when you can move into the new reality, but the disciples are not yet there.
No.
Are they? And I don't think they get there until after the cross, actually.
I want to be very careful here, but some of our cultural beliefs that we have been taught the last 50, 60, 80 years were strictly cultural beliefs. And we were basically led down the path that these are doctrinal. They're not. That was a lie.
Yes.
It is not doctrine. It's a cultural thing.
Yes.
And to be rid of that was very uplifting to me because I left the church because of those things. And when I found out, don't pay any attention to that nonsense, this is the real deal here.
Yeah.
Then it was quite a relief to me to stop the nonsense and get back down to basis. The cultural thing of the church is not doctrinal.
Yes.
In many cases.
Yes, yes. And I think that's so important for us to realize because we have been fed cultural lies that aren't the truth. And they impact us. You have individuals, as I don't know your name, and has pointed out, you also have individual circumstances and situations that have taught you lies, that when they're undone, or when you're realizing that your hopes aren't going to be realized through that cultural distortion or that life lie, that can affect you. And it affects your relationship with God, doesn't it? So, I'll give you just another little personal lie that I grew up with. If you work hard enough, if you do the work well enough, you'll be loved. So I spent the majority of my life doing my best, and I never got what I wanted. But when you come into the realization that it's not going to change the reality of your existence, that losing that lie makes a difference. So
it's freeing.
Huh?
It's freeing.
It can be. It can be. Or it can be devastating. Right. Initially, it's devastating because you realize you've spent all this time believing a lie. And then, it's different. So Proverbs 13, verse 12. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. Hope unrealized is devastating. If you believe a lie and then discover you've been deceived, it's painful. It's painful that you have been deceived. So as I said earlier, the disciples kind of stay in this state of confusion up until after the cross. They never get out of that space. So what is Jesus' answer to their predicament? What is the answer that he gives? The last sentence of that chapter.
Pray.
Pray. Prayer. When you're in a state of confusion, when hope has been devastated, when you have questions, his answer is prayer. But I also think, let me just make a couple of them. Coming back from their missionary journey, they're on a spiritual high. Remember how excited they are as they come back? They've seen so much evidence that Jesus is the Messiah because of everything he's saying and doing. And at this point, he's up against all their misunderstandings and doubts plaguing the disciples. They're very ambivalent. They can't order their thinking to make sense of it all. They're confused. So I believe in each miracle, Jesus is enacting a parable. Each miracle is teaching a teaching moment in bold print. And he uses the words of the Father in this story to describe the state of the disciples' mind. The words of the Father are what?
Yeah.
I believe, but help my non-belief. I believe, but help my non-belief. The disciples are struggling between belief and non-belief. Is what we have trusted to believe the truth, or are we deluded? You know. So Jesus is saying through the words of this parable, even in your confusion, in the midst of belief and unbelief, I am going to release you from the bondage of Satan. You see it? Jesus walks into that scenario when they're confused, they're a mess, they don't know whether to believe or not believe. You know, they have declared their faith, and yet they're so confused. And Jesus says, in spite of, I'm going to release you from Satan's bondage.
Well, Jesus had to be disappointed in the disciples as much as the disciples were disappointed in him.
Yes.
I would think.
Yeah, he's human.
And they're just people. I mean, they were chosen, but they were just 12 people. Just pick out 12 people.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, it would help to a higher standard.
Are we? Stacy?
As the disciples are realizing more and more conviction that Jesus is the Messiah, they can see his power, and they truly believe he's the Messiah. When they hear Jesus say that he's going to die, it's just like everything's just going to come to a crashing end. It's just like, what can you possibly do if you're gone? And they just totally missed the fact that the sacrificial lamb that they've been doing for thousands of years was a sign of what the Messiah would do. It would give its life. And they never made the connection. He's here to be the sacrificial lamb. He's here to give up his life and to see that it's actually the fulfillment of what the Messiah was supposed to do instead of the end of what the Messiah was supposed to do. So they thought that when he died, everything was going to be over. But no, it was just him fulfilling the whole purpose of what he came to do. And they just missed all that.
Because they bought into the cultural lie, haven't they? They bought it. Dennis, were you please again? I'm sorry. Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Kind of, sort of. Faith is normally considered a religious word, but it does not have to be a religious word. We've heard in the secular world also. And the faith that most people have is in something of culture, a new way of living, a new way of laws, a new lifestyle, a new whole mindset. But they were always empty. There was nothing behind them but a lot of politicians' words. If you look at Hebrews 11:1, it talks about a faith that has substance, a faith that has evidence. And the people that are listed in 11, Hebrews 11, got it right. They were people of faith focused on God. We talked about it. We banter around the abstract philosophies a lot. But where the rubber meets the road is true worship of a living God. Prayer is a form of that. You've talked about prayer this morning. It's a form of worship. I'm gonna leave it at that.
Well, I think you're making a significant point. What circumstances in those lives of those people listed in Hebrews 11, what circumstance was their expectations fulfilled? What's it say at the end of the chapter? You want to look at that briefly? Go ahead.
Sometimes it seems to me it's not an outright lie. It's just we have such a strong belief system, and Ken referred to this. We're just sure it's going to happen this way, and it doesn't happen that way. And that rocks our boat, like you talked about.
Yeah.
You work hard, you get married, you pay your tithe, you do those things, and you'll have a good life. Well, that didn't work for Job, at least for a while. And you just have to deal with it when it doesn't quite work out short term the way we think it's supposed to.
Yes, we think that we're going to have happiness when we have that little white cottage with the white picket fence. And when we get it, guess what? We're not satisfied. Or we dream of becoming a CEO of a company and we finally get it. And guess what? It doesn't satisfy us. Our hopes in that thing out there bringing us satisfaction, it doesn't happen. But let's go back to Don's point here about Hebrews 11. Look at the last verse of chapter 11. All these were approved through their faith, but they did not receive what was promised. They did not receive what was promised. Think about it, John.
You know, it's true that we have expectations, especially if you were raised in the church. But there are people that mess up their lives. There's a lot of them. And what type?
A lot of us.
Huh?
A lot of us.
Yes. Including myself. So how do you get in? Fortunately, in Hebrews 11, Samson is mentioned. And, you know, what did he have as far as hope goes after his eyes were taken out? And he found out that, you know, I can't trust this Philistine woman, but it's too late now. And then, of course, somebody who's not mentioned in Hebrews 11, but I'm sure will be in heaven, was Solomon. Solomon had, as far as women goes, he had everything, and he was the king, and he was greatly beloved by God when he was young. I'm not saying he wasn't when he got older, really messed up, but there's a lot of stories, fortunately, in the Bible that give people hope when they have made a mess of their lives and they have trashed their lives, or they have struggled with some influence, like with Samson, that had a power over them. And for those type of people that we can relate to, thank God that there is hope for them. And it's not just about whether you self-actualize, but whether you messed up and about ready to go down the river and there's no bridge to grab a hold of, and that God is still there. That's significant.
Wayne?
I'm really mystified on the 23rd verse that we've been studying, where he said that they will kill him, and on the third day that he will be raised to life. And the next sentence says the disciples were filled with grief. Did they not hear the second sentence? Did they just ignore it? I don't understand. I mean, the miracle itself that he said that he's going to be raised 3 days later, why are they so upset about it?
Yeah, that is a confusing thing, especially when they have seen Jesus raising other people from the dead. at this point. So it is confusing, but the only framework, and others in the class may have a different perspective on this, that I can put it in is that when you believe something so completely and thoroughly, and someone is bringing a new idea to you that is outside of your paradigm, it's confusing. It's confusing. So there was a hand over at Ruth, and then.
You know, in Hebrews 11, it talks about some of these great people of faith, and their lives were over and over again off balance. They were off balance.
Yes.
But they continued with endurance. And the verse that you read, the 39th verse of chapter 11, said that all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. And the reason they didn't receive it at that time in their lifetime was because God had provided something better. He wanted to wait for all of us so that we would all receive our promise together at the same time. And then the following chapter begins talking again about endurance, that as we run that race of life, to run with endurance and keep looking at Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. So no matter what off balance events happens in our life, we need to continue running that race and keep looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. I think it is so wonderful that God did not reward the people in Hebrews 11 because he wanted to reward all of us sitting here today at the same time.
Beautiful, beautiful concept. You know, if you look back at the story in Matthew 8 of the centurion who's coming, requesting that his daughter be healed or his servant be healed, Jesus is astonished at their faith. And why the centurion's faith? Why is Jesus so astonished at his faith? Because from my perspective, no matter what the evidence was, he believed the word only. He believed the word only. These people believed the promise despite the evidence. Despite the evidence. And that's what faith is. Faith is holding on to the promise, no matter what the circumstances appear. Okay, Wendy and then Laura.
Oh, I just appreciate what Wendy said. You want me to speak up? Okay. I'm just sitting here thinking about what he said of they missed the second part, but it also said they went into grief. And the very first step of grief that I've observed is a complete denial so that you can't even see beyond that. And so, like even with losing my little boy to suicide, it was so hard to think about him coming back. It was just, I'm here right now dealing with this, but as time has gone on, I began to focus on that resurrection in a different way, in a more accepting way.
Yeah.
Anyway, I appreciated the way you said that.
Yeah, does that make sense, Dwayne, what she's saying there? That your first response when you're hearing that is denial. Okay, Roy here.
What I was going to say is that what Ruth is talking about to me is trust. But our problem is that we trust in ourselves and not in selflessness. And so our self gets entwined in the journey or the direction we're going in, and we need to get rid of the self and become selfless. And when we become selfless, we can have the trust that what God has planned that is better than what we had envisioned is going to be a reality. And so to me, trust was the key to understanding that you have to have the trust through selflessness and not selfish.
Do we not have any curiosity as human beings of what's next after he's been raised to life? We just only focus on the negative. We have no hope.
Yeah. For them at that moment, they didn't.
No, they did not.
They didn't have any hope.
That's why they were filled with grief.
Yeah.
And I just don't understand, you know, when he said that he's going to be raised 3 days later. Okay, great. That's pretty good news. So what after that?
But if that happened to you, what, you know, I think, well, let me put it this way. We have the context of the resurrection to look at that story, don't we? But they're wrapped up in their experience of all that they've been through for the last 6 months. They don't have the perspective we have. So.
And remember, the Gospels were written after. So this was not contemporaneous. This was after the resurrection. They wrote the Gospels, so they can now add that piece. Oh yeah, he rose again.
Well, but he did say that to them. He did say.
Yes, but they didn't remember it until after.
I mean, have you ever had anybody say something to you, somebody who you trusted, and they said something that was quite different, and you go, really? I mean, come on. Now, what they said to you ended up being exactly right, but you just didn't understand it.
It's called conspiracy theory.
When we go to alcohol, when you go to college, you usually spend 4 years there.
Yeah.
And when you come out of college, you're different than when you arrived. These boys didn't have even that much time. It was less than that. So they didn't get it when Jesus died. Remember, they went up into the house. They were worried they might even get killed, you know? They didn't get it till Jesus showed up. And then they said, I remember when he said, Mary came to him and said, he's not there. Right. You know, again, they didn't get it then either. But then he showed up and they connected the dots. Jesus had to say that so they could connect the dots and understand it. The other thing is that what Roy was saying, you know, about selfish versus selfless. Jesus was in the desert as a human being, and the devil offered him a pretty good deal. You know, I'll give you all this, I'll give you something to eat. And Jesus did not take the bait. You know, I mean, as a human being, he didn't take the bait. Probably most everybody in this room may have. You know, fortunately, we have a resurrection. We have Easter coming.
Yeah.
You know, and so, okay, we're saved. So I think that for me, I guess I can appreciate why they didn't understand it, because I don't understand some of this stuff so much. I hope someday I do. But there's hope in that too, for me.
For all of us, yeah. Clear in the back.
And interesting. One of the,
Can you speak up?
One of the mysteries that I kind of just is mind-boggling is that concept of faith as a gift, and so maybe the gift had been withheld almost for the narrative to be completed. You know, it's like it's one of those crazy mysteries. Like faith is a gift, yet I enact it. How does that cycle work? I don't know.
It is.
They didn't get it. We all understand that. But the Bible often talks about humanity as a corporate whole, a oneness to it. We don't understand it more than they did back then. We look at it, looking back at the cross, we still don't get it. What if we were to take our eyes off ourselves momentarily, which is awful tough to do, and look at the whole situation through the eyes of heaven? Would we get it? The Jews of all people were given the whole sanctuary system. They went through all these sacrifices, all these things that point to the Messiah to come. They didn't get it. They lost sight of it. It became too repetitious for them for 400 years or whatever, you know. Try to look at ourselves through the eyes of heaven. we might get it.
You're making a really important point. I think that often when we're facing life circumstances, we have a worldly theology of that, a perspective of that, instead of having a biblical worldview. You know, Job struggled in all that he went through because he didn't know chapter 1. You know, he didn't have the biblical or the heavenly view of what he was going through. He only had the circumstances around his life, and he's presenting his anger and his disorientation and his confusion, and he's presenting all of that to God in the, as we have it there, 38 chapters were. He didn't have chapter 1. We have chapter 1. We have chapter 2 in the crucifixion. But without those biblical perspectives, it can distort our reality. Okay, John.
One, by the way, there's been some excellent comments here. We can get off on them. But if you look at some of the very, very, very important people in the Old Testament, and one of them is Jacob. Of course, his name later was changed to Israel. In his journey, after committing his sin, right away, he saw the stairway to heaven with angels ascending and descending. And, that could have shaped his life to a great deal. Whether it did or not, I wasn't there. But then later on, right before his crisis with Esau coming after him, I'm going to get you. The Bible says that a group of angels met him on a road to Mahanaim, I think it's called. And, if angels were to come to me and greet me and be chummy with me for a little while, I'd say, whoa. But right after that was his experience with Esau coming. And of course, that night wrestling match with Christ. And his name was changed as a sign that, you're getting approval from God. But then later on in his life, as he got more, where his life dream, if you could say, got more messed up. And when he had to go with his sons to Egypt to meet the ruler, who was none other than Joseph. But he said, all these things are against me. Now, for all the things that have happened in his life that were verifications or, that God is real and God loves you and he's going to see you through it. At that time, he was saying, all these things are against me because Benjamin's, I don't know what's going to happen to Benjamin, and Joseph is gone. He was revealing all these bad things that happened. And the Lord understood that. And like this sister said right over here, Ruth, about persevering and holding on. God knows how human we are and how fragile we are. I don't care how long you've been in the church. If something hits you right in between your nose, it can throw you for a big loop. So, gotta hang in there and learn and grow, and it's all okay to be part of that process. God does not knock us for having I fell off the bridge, or I fell off the wagon and I got run over by a semi. He doesn't do that. So God is good all the time.
So just if we have a few more minutes here, and I want to move on to the other two stories, but I want to emphasize what Jesus is doing in this enacted parable. I think it's so important for us is struggling on the journey to hear this enacted parable. That even in our ambivalence between doubt and faith, God is speaking into that scenario and saying, I'm going to free you. I'm going to free you from the bondage of sin. So let's leave that one, and let's go on to lesson 90. I hope that you are spending time with the lessons that God is sending out. You know, the questions he asks are just so important and so comprehensive.
I was interested in what Jesus said about his followers' experience when they came back after having these great adventures, casting out devils and all of those adventures that they had. And so they were having their cat meetings and they were rejoicing over all of their successes. And Jesus said, he tried to point them to the right way to look at all of this. He said, don't just rejoice over the fact that you have been able to cast out, not with your own strength, hopefully, but the strength of God, cast out these devils. But he said the important thing is for you to remember that in all this, not because you did these things, but because you came to me to get a new heart, your names are written in the books of life.
Yes. Rejoice in that.
Rejoice in that.
Yes, thank you. So let's look at the temple tax. I think I asked somebody to read lesson 9. Did I ask somebody to read that? Let me quickly read it here. And so lesson 90 in your book, the temple tax. After Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax came to Peter and asked, does your teacher pay the temple tax? Yes, he does, he replied. When Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. What do you think, Simon? He asked. From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own sons or from others? From others, Peter answered. Then the sons are exempt, Jesus says to him. But so that we may not offend them and go to the lake, throw out your line, take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my taxes and yours. What a precious story. What is Jesus doing here? Peter is still in the state of chaos. Well, look first at Peter's behavior. What has he done here?
Lie?
Well, is he lying actually, or is he
Responding.
Huh?
Responding impetuously.
Okay. Yeah, he has distorted information, doesn't he? Yes. What's he do? He's responding impetuously.
Without thinking.
What else may he be doing?
He may be defending Jesus, saying, "Oh no, my teacher, he's doing the right thing and stuff."
I think that's a beautiful perspective. You know, all this stuff that's going on with Jesus, and Peter knows that they're planning on killing. So Peter is coming to Jesus' defense. Isn't it? Yes. Anything else you see here that Peter's doing? How does Jesus handle Peter? How does Jesus handle Peter? What?
He's let him think, critical thinking, I guess.
Yeah, he's asking him some profound questions to help him process that. Do you see the kindness of God in that? Amen. The kindness. He's not one bit critical, but he's caring for Peter in his good intentions. In his good intentions, yes. He's caring for Peter. So one other little piece here in lesson number 91. And this is back in dealing with his own family again. So after this, I don't have time to do this. We don't have time, Roy, to do this next lesson, but I'll just point out that Jesus' own family does not believe in him. You see that here in this story? They're doing the exact same thing to Jesus that the Pharisees were doing a few chapters back, when they are saying, you know, come demonstrate your miracles, you know, act out your miracles so that we can believe. And what does Jesus do in that thing? Verse 6, the right time for me has not yet come. For you, any time is right. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify that what it does is evil. You go to the feast. I'm not yet going up to this feast, because for me, the right time has not yet come. Do you hear an echo of Jesus' life? Think about when he was 12. What did he say to his parents when they found him in the temple?
About my father's business.
I need to be about my father's business. What does he say to his mother in Cana at the wedding? My time has not yet come. So, and then the Pharisees are trying to get him to do these miracles, and he refuses. His brothers are trying to do it. He refuses. Who is he listening to?
God.
Holy Spirit.
Yes, he has one focus of where he's getting his directions.
He has to do it right.
Yes. Jesus himself has got to be on the edge. He is facing the cross. And as we look at the stories from here on, we are going to see more and more the struggle of Jesus up until Gethsemane and even on the cross. But he has one place where he is listening, one voice that he is listening to have direction for his life. In the midst of our chaos, in the midst of our lack of hope, what voice are we listening to? What voice are we listening to?
Yes, absolutely.
I left a little time for Roy for his announcement, if that's okay.
I wanted to make an announcement, although I suspect most of you think of me as being on the TV because I'm usually up there in the past at least. I'm going to start a Sabbath school class at 11:30 on May the 14th. And the two most important subjects in the Bible, in my opinion, for this time in life is the gospel and the end time, because that's where we're living. And this class will be about the end time. The pastor and I have, for the last 5 years, been having meetings and talking about what I have been writing essays on. And I have one of the last essays back on the back table back here. And if you would be interested in attending that class, I would suggest you take this essay and read it and decide if this is a topic for you. We're going to start actually talking about 2 Thessalonians chapter, which is somewhat discussed today about believing the lie as an example. And the idea being that what do we need to do in these days to keep from being in fear because of the things that are changing in this world? And God has given us revelation, which is designed to help us understand each of the events that we're going to be facing and how we can face them in faith. And that's what this Sabbath school class will be about.
You say it's at 11:30?
At 11:30.
Like during divine worship?
During the third service, right? I told Mary the other day that I was competing with him, and then I said April Fools. But I feel as if this is an important topic. Now, I taught for 3 years Revelation back about 5 years ago when I was here all the time, and it was a good class, and then we had a lot of participants. But I think this class is even more important because it looks at all of the end time events through the lens of the seals and the trumpets. And to us, that helps us understand exactly what God is doing for us during these changes and how we can be without fear and have trust, because that is the key to even this lesson in my mind, is that we need to have God's trust, not our trust. And if we have God's trust, we will not have fear. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Roy. Now, Roy, why don't you, do you have some things to hand out?
Yes, right in the back.
Why don't you stand at the door and then you can hand them out as people leave, and that some people will be hesitant to get your material because they'll be in a hurry, or grandkids or kids or whatever. But, I want to thank you. This was a good one. This was a good day to be in. This is our third time to study this story. There are so many other stories that Doug has mentioned over and over again. They're too rich to leave, but we just have to move on. This one we took 3 weeks, and I'm very grateful. About disappointment or things that you thought you'd work your whole life for. I'll tell you a quick story. I don't want to get too personal, but I worked my whole life to try to make money. My purpose to try to be a successful person. And I spent my whole life hoping I could make a certain amount, get a check for that amount one time in my life. If I could get that one check, everything would be okay. Big check. So I decided I could do it. I pulled it off. I stood there. The attorneys handed me the check. Took it to my car. I was so happy. I kept looking at it. It was just amazing that I had done this. By the time I got home, I was depressed. I looked at that check. I laid it in the seat by my car. I was so depressed. I spent my whole life trying to achieve that check. So my personality, I felt there was something wrong, so I'm going to do it again. A couple months later, I was able to pull another deal. Big check. One of the most depressing times of my life, again. But God is so good to us. This is 2009. The world crashed economically in 2009. Even though I was depressed at the time, those 2 checks helped me survive the Obama years, the great recessions. And it took even more money than that just to survive those 8 years. So don't be too depressed. If you get what you think you want and it doesn't really pan out like you thought, God's there. I'm more than proof of it. He gets it. Right. He gets it. He knows what he's doing. And you're just a tool for him to help you help somebody else to get there. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. But yes, I had lost hope after I got what I wanted. Next week, I'll be teaching or leading our discussion again. The following week, John will be here teaching, and then Doug will be teaching in 3 weeks. And with that said, Juan, why don't you have a
Merciful Father, we are just in awe of your graciousness in our fumbling and bumbling, our confusion, our grief, our misunderstanding, but that you are there. Your arms are beneath us still and sustaining us and giving us something to hold on to until our hope in you is realized. Bless everyone in this class. You know their crises of faith and hope. Sustain them as they struggle to hold on in Jesus' name.
Thank you. See you next week.